Welcome to Real Talk in ELT, a podcast that talks about the reality of teaching English.
Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of Real Talk in ELT. As promised, I do have a case study for you. So recently I attended a Conversations in BELF webinar, and the guest speaker was Professor Kurt Kohn. He is at a university in Germany. I forget which specific one. I can put it into the show notes. And I did do a summaries and side notes episode about his presentation, talking about giving learners agency and emancipation using their own language, especially in BELF scenarios. Though we were talking about BELF obviously because the group that puts it together is for business English, but you can certainly see the applications in regular ELF contexts. And it was a very, very interesting perspective. So if you haven't seen that before listening to this, because I'm going to refer to that, you might want to listen to that episode. It's a little bit longer because I go through his entire episode, and then I have some, obviously, my side notes. Kelly's side notes and ramblings go on for a little bit. But today, what I wanted to give to you is a case study on a student that I have. Now, let me give you the profile of her. She is a manager for the tax department in a multinational company. The company is, she's currently looking for a new position, put it that way. So she is going through the interview process. She's hired a headhunter. I work with her on the English end of interviewing and getting her LinkedIn profile and everything up to date. And then she's working with a headhunter here in São Paulo that is helping her go on interviews and get in touch with companies, etc., etc. So here's the case study. It is not pleasant, people. So let me just start with that. So the situation is, she is a lovely person. She's very, very competent. She has years of experience in working with and leading teams. Her resume speaks for itself in terms of competency. She's worked for several different companies, mostly for most recently doing the taxation for an international company with educational services, so service providers. But she has worked with taxation for services and taxation for products. If you don't know, the Brazilian taxation system is extremely complicated. It's a mess. We'll just put it that way. It's a mess is the nice way of putting it. The taxation system here is extremely complex, and it changes frequently. So having experience with dealing with both products and services and tax planning and all sorts of stuff, trust me when I say she has vast experience, because it's not an easy area, especially here in Brazil. That being said, and I know that she is a good leader and manager because I actually have taught independently of her. I have taught other people who have worked for her in previous projects in previous companies, and they always speak very, very highly of her and her competency. And I've been working with her for around a year. So she went for a well, let me just explain why I'm looking down. So if you're not watching, I'm looking down, and because I wrote all of my notes about this case study on Post-it notes, because she was telling it to me, and as she was telling it to me, like a light bulb clicked in my head, and I was like, oh my God, let me take notes on this really quick. The only thing that I had next to me was a pad of hot pink sticky notes. And so I'm going to try and relay this case study through my hot pink sticky notes here. So she applied for a position in a major company. It was through the headhunter services. So it's a company that works with human resources companies for contracting, manager level and higher. So it's going to be more of a leadership position. The title said manager. And there was a job description as a tax manager, which is exactly her profile. So headhunter set it up, based on the description that was on their I think they have a platform that they work with companies with. And at least that's what I used to do as a headhunter, but I'm not sure if they anyways, sidebar. So she went on an initial interview with, I think it was via a phone call or something like that. It was not a video conference. She spoke briefly with the human resources representative at the company, pretty much just filtering her out, making sure that she was who she said she was and that she had the qualifications that she claimed she did on her CV. Normal. Then she went through a English language proficiency testing process, which was fine, and then she passed. And of course, then she had scheduled a video conference. I apologize. It wasn't a video conference call. It was an in-person interview. An in-person interview with the director of the department she would be reporting directly to him. Now, when she got there, immediately she felt that it was kind of an aggressive environment. Not aggressive, but just very tense. It was not very welcoming, which was kind of unusual because usually, I mean, let's be honest, interviews are very contrived scenarios. They're not natural. Conversation doesn't happen in those scenarios. And it's a very weird process in itself. But she said that the vibe of the room, quote unquote vibe, the feeling in the room was very tense. And the director or whatever his position was, said, he started the conversation with, I need to be honest with you and I need to be clear. I don't have control over, I'm going to sum this up. I don't have control over this hiring process. The company is now mandating through DE&I initiatives that we hire more women in my department. And I have no control over the candidates that are being selected during this process. So immediately, I have other thoughts about DE&I, but immediately there's tension in the room because this director is obviously frustrated with his hiring process because he needs somebody for his team. And he has no control over the candidates that he has. As a former person that used to work in human resources, used to work in like corporate America and all that stuff, I can understand his frustrations. I think it was inappropriate that he took his frustrations out on the candidates. I don't think that that's really showing much professionalism on his part. But I also think that the company is culpable in this matter too because they have DE&I initiatives, which in theory, I support diversity, equity, inclusion. I do support it in theory. However, I think the way that it's being implemented and practiced in companies is actually causing more problems than doing good. Because like this manager, he has no control over who is working on his team. And I just don't think that that's a good thing. If you're building a team, you have to be confident in your team members, and you have to be able to work in a very cohesive and collaborative environment. And if you're being forced to hire someone that you had no hand in any of the process, in terms of selection, in terms of job description writing, in terms of he had no hand in the process. And he explicitly said it to my student. Again, I think he was unprofessional in that aspect, but I also can see his perspective that he has no control over this process. So he's frustrated because he's sitting with candidates that are applying to a job position that has been posted and that he did not write, that he had no control over the content and the responsibilities and all of that, and that he has no hand in the process of screening these candidates. So from the company, I think the company is culpable because they're implementing DE&I practices and initiatives in a way that is actually going to cause more harm than good. And from his perspective, he's wholeheartedly, I believe that he was being completely inappropriate and unprofessional, because that's something that has nothing to do with the candidate. So my poor student is sitting there, and the poor woman is sitting listening to this, and she's like, well, this isn't off to a good start. So that happened. And then he said that the Human Resources Department had put a manager title onto this position, but the open position is actually not a manager. You will have the title of manager, but you have no employees, and you are the department in total. So you will not be doing the functions of a manager. You'll be doing the functions of an analyst or a technician or something like that, someone who has technical skills. You will be in theory, quote unquote, a manager, but that's because you're taking on the responsibilities of something that a team should be doing. So the job description clearly stated that it was a manager position, and the director then said, it is not a manager position. I had no control over that. And so what you're being hired for is that you will be the entire department. This is a huge company, by the way. So being the entire department encompasses way more than just what one person can do. So she and I had prepared for a professional interview. We landed in this completely ridiculous situation. The cherry on top, it was that he said to her that if you don't know anything about the process, meaning the process, because you're going to be taking over multiple, really it's kind of a multidisciplinary position that she's going to be taking over, you need to be a person that birth by fire, learn as you go, and you have to work hard and dream big. That was his introduction to the job interview, or the job position. So it's this huge, from what I understand, it's this huge business consulting services. So it's like they do consulting with. I'm back. They do consulting with other businesses, and I mean it's a business consultancy, so that's what they do. If you don't know what that is, then you can look it up. So as a reference, one of the major companies here in Brazil in 2023 that has declared bankruptcy, and it's been a huge scandal in the news. There's been quite a few of them, but it's kind of like the big one. Hired them to handle their bankruptcy proceedings and to manage the business as they close the business. So multi-million-dollar contracts. I mean, this is a huge company, and there's one person in charge of the tax department. So she was called for the interview with this director. The company is trying to hire more women. Apparently, the HR explicitly, Human Resources explicitly said this to her in the first interview, and the director reiterated that is true, that they're trying to hire more women because they need to have better representation in the accounting department, but what the Human Resources is doing to implement that policy is to create the jobs and job openings by themselves, to not consult with the leaders of the departments on the responsibilities, nor are they consulting with them on the titles of anything, of any position, and they are not allowed to interfere in the process at all. And so they're being given a bunch of candidates that are fitting to a job description that they didn't provide to Human Resources. So it's a bit of a mess. So she felt really that he made the job extremely undesirable, the way that he was describing it. And I think it was because it didn't match with what Human Resources had put out and what the position that she had applied to. The position she had applied to was an invented position. The position that she would be filling would be working with this man who's obviously frustrated for and I think, honestly, for valid reasons, some are valid reasons. And yeah, so this is creating an environment where she didn't know what to do. Sorry, when my dog barks, it's usually because we have a delivery. It's delivery day at the house. So getting back into it. Summing up, this experience for my student was extremely distressing because she didn't really expect that to happen, and she was very much caught off guard. And so while she wasn't actually interested in participating any further in the whole process of hiring, and to be honest, she was very much turned off by the by the idea of working with this gentleman who obviously wasn't interested in the candidates that he was interviewing, and she seemed to be, she's a manager, so she has management qualities and she's management material, so, and she wouldn't really be managing anything, so it was clear that she actually wouldn't be finding anything super fulfilling in that position as well. It was a frustrating situation all around. I think that my student handled it as professionally as possible. But the director who was interviewing her was extremely unprofessional for kind of airing out the dirty laundry if he wasn't really interested in participating in those types of interviews, because he's being forced into doing something that he's having to hire to meet a quota. And he has no authority in who is working on his team and putting qualifications and putting responsibilities and selecting and filtering through candidates. I think that he has some justified frustrations. I also think that the company is very much to fault because they're implementing a unsustainable DE&I initiative. While I think DE&I is important, I also think that the way that we implement these types of programs is going to be the key issue in whether or not we are adding to the problem and causing more dissension and problems amongst team members, or whether we are creating an open and inviting and collaborative environment. That's as political as I'm going to get on that. I'm not really interested in talking about the politics of DE&I, but the interesting part for me was that my student entered into a very uncomfortable situation, like I said, and it's related to Dr. Kurt Kahn's talk that I had done a summaries and side notes episode about, in terms that she was in a BELF scenario with huge communicative surprises. And how did I address that as a language teacher? Because I'm not interested in the politics of it. I'm not interested in reprimanding someone who's being unprofessional. I'm not interested in talking about any of that. I'm interested in helping my student being able to effectively communicate in these types of scenarios. And there was a huge surprise. And so I saw that as, well, this is something that I didn't prepare her for well enough, because what she had told me was that she froze. And that is, I was sad to hear that, and not froze that she wasn't able to answer any of the questions. She was able to do the interview part of it fine, but when the director started relaying these messages of frustration and conflicting responsibilities and things like that, she didn't really know how to respond to those things. She said that she did her best, and she said, okay, I understand there was miscommunication. She said something along the lines of, okay, well, that's not really the position that I'm applying for. She was able to navigate it more or less, but it was very, very uncomfortable for her to navigate in that situation. And that's where I saw an opportunity for me, that I didn't prepare her well enough to deal with scenarios like that, because I actually didn't even think it was going to happen. I had not anticipated the problem that she was going to walk into an interview and be unwelcomed by the director during the hiring process. I wasn't really anticipating that there would be that level of unprofessionalism in terms of oversharing information that is, company policy and things along those lines. So I didn't do a good job of preparing her for that because it wasn't something that I had anticipated. Now that she has been through this scenario, I will try to incorporate that with my other students. And I think one of the ways that I can do that is obviously through mock interviews and allowing them to practice and to experience different types of scenarios. I'm quite good at I'm quite a good actor now that I've been teaching for so many years, and so I would like to run some mock interviews with my students, not only with this kind of the stereotypical stuff, but also with uncomfortable situations or situations that kind of come out of left field, things that are surprising for them, and see how they react to it. And then have the discussion about it and say, how would you deal with this type of situation? I obviously put them in the situation first, and then how would you deal with that type of situation? What are some things that we can work on? What are some phrases that you would feel to be useful to kind of avoid interacting with specific comments, or to redirect the conversation in a more positive direction, these types of things, these types of strategies. So it really made me sit and reflect on better preparing my students for things that they're going to run into, not only things that are normal and typical, but also things that are uncomfortable. And I've done this, it's funny because I've done this for in terms of like job responsibilities, like giving presentations, performance reviews, telephone calls, negotiations, and those were all things that I predicted that there would be a conflict or that there would be tension, and I just never thought that there would be conflict or tension with a future employer and a candidate, because that's not typically a scenario in which you have these type of tensions, but it happened. So now, reflecting back, it's something that I need to prepare for. And so that is my case study. Sorry, it was a little broken up. We had interruptions in the middle with deliveries. But I podcast from home, so this is what it is, people. So it would be interesting to start thinking of and reflecting about Professor Kahn's idea of communicative surprises that happen in BELF or ELF scenarios, and how we can better prepare our students for creating authentic scenarios. And I would say, by doing some sort of, not simulations, this is simulations, mock experiences of that, and taking on different personas, and giving them some genuine, well, if I were this person, if I were a very unprofessional director at a multinational company, and I didn't want to hire that candidate, what would I say to that candidate? And that's what I did afterwards. And I said, all right, well, let's practice this, and let's see how you handle yourself in that situation. So I think that this is a very useful thing to think about, and just kind of raise awareness to, of communicative surprises, things that we might not anticipate, but always kind of keeping our learners on their toes so that they can use their repertoire, use the language that they have, and creatively navigate situations that are not normal or atypical of what we imagine to be happening. That's it for today, and I will be back with more, of course, in the near future. Hopefully this is helpful, and I will see you all soon.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk and ELT. Want to join the conversation? Head on over to Instagram at Kelly Pennington ELT and send me a message. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube or Spotify channel to stay up to date, and of course, take care of yourself, your health, your vibe, and your tribe. Until next time.